Local food economies are essential for restoring our health and the health of the planet as a whole. But to build those kinds of economies, we must recapture our rights from global corporations. That's why I support World Localization Day. Greetings to everyone participating in World Localization Day. I'm Naomi Klein. I'm speaking to you from the place I love most in the world, the unceded Coast Salish territories of the Sechelt and Squamish nations in a small community called Whale Quay, or Half Moon Bay, British Columbia. This is salmon country. The salmon that spawn in our streams here feed our amazing forests and oceans and the birds in the sky. Salmon are at the center of Indigenous culture here, and they are the lifeblood of our local fisheries. Salmon are the keystone of our local economy, human and non-human alike. They are life. And yet, as I think about localization and speaking to you today, I realize that they are in grave danger. They are in danger from overfishing for export. They're in danger from fish farms that introduce pathogens to their populations. They're in danger from oil spills, from new oil pipelines that should never be built and yet are being pushed through on Indigenous lands. And underneath it all, they are in danger from climate chaos because these incredibly generous, abundant fish may well not be able to survive in the warm waters that are their future. We need a global climate movement to confront these forces, but that movement is strongest when it is made up of many, many smaller local movements that are rooted in places like this and driven by the love of place and by the need to protect their land, water, and air. One of the things that I found over the years covering the climate movement is that global movements are powerful, but people fight differently when their lives depend on it. We saw it in Standing Rock. We see it in so many locally based struggles against purportedly a pipeline or a new coal-fired power plant. But underneath that, they're not against anything. They're for something. They are for the place where they live and the place that sustains them. I've also spent much of my life studying the impacts of large shocks on societies. And one of the things that happens in the midst of large-scale shocks and crises is that we realize very quickly how vulnerable our globalized supply chains are. And in the rocky world of climate chaos, we're seeing many more examples of this. One that springs to my mind was what happened to Puerto Rico when it was pummeled by Hurricane Maria. That was a Category 5 storm, devastating impact. It knocked out the port, it knocked out communication, it knocked out, obviously, energy. What made Puerto Rico so vulnerable and what made that such a deadly storm was not just the impact of the storm itself, but the aftermath when those supply chains that provided imported energy and imported food were severed. And it made no sense, for an island like Puerto Rico, so with such fertile soil and such abundant sun and wind, to be importing fossil fuel energy and to be importing so much food and exporting what they were growing. And these sometimes feel like abstract issues, but when there is a shock like that, it's the difference between life and death. Localization in this context is survival. Here in Canada, we did a pretty good job in the face of the pandemic in the first phase. But when it came to vaccination, we were caught completely flat-footed because in Canada, we've lost our ability to make vaccines. So once again, survival depended on these global supply chains and global corporations, and it hasn't turned out well. We already knew that living more locally was good for the planet. If it's done intelligently, it can dramatically lower emissions from shipping and other forms of transportation And many of you participating in this gathering have been saying this for decades upon decades. But the truth is that even if we do reduce emissions very rapidly, as we must, we've done so much damage that we will be facing more shocks, more novel viruses, more cataclysmic storms. Our communities must prepare by becoming more self-sufficient, more able to provide for our basic food, energy, and medical needs. Self-sufficient is not the same as isolated or parochial or insular. I'm an internationalist, but more sturdy, more ready, and more resilient communities is what we need for when the next shock comes. Thank you.